Life has a strange way of bringing people back together, sometimes as a lesson, sometimes as a test. The city was alive with movement, neon lights flickering against the damp pavement. Cars rushed past, their headlights cutting through the evening haze. Nathan Carter stepped out of his sleek black Mercedes, adjusting the cuffs of his designer suit. A man worth millions, owner of one of the most successful tech companies in the country, he had spent years climbing his way to the top. But tonight, something stopped him in his tracks. Across the street, near the steps of an old bookstore, a woman sat hunched over, her arms wrapped protectively around two small children. Her clothes were tattered, her hair tangled, but it was her face that made Nathan freeze. It was her, Sophia Reynolds, the girl who had made his school years a living nightmare. His mind snapped back to the past. Lunchtime humiliation, whispered insults, laughter at his expense. She had been relentless, always finding ways to remind him that he was nothing, that he would never be anyone. And now, she was the one sitting in the cold, begging for spare change. A dozen emotions collided inside him. Shock, confusion, a flicker of something darker, something dangerously close to satisfaction. But before he could process it, one of the children stirred, pressing closer to Sophia for warmth. The boy couldn't have been older than 6. The little girl looked even younger. Nathan exhaled, his grip tightening around the leather wallet in his hand. He could walk away, pretend he never saw her. Or he could finally confront the person who had once torn him down, now at her lowest point. And he had no idea which one he wanted more. Nathan crossed the street, his footsteps slow and deliberate. Sophia didn't look up, too focused on pulling her thin coat tighter around the children. He stopped just a few feet away, watching her struggle to shield them from the cold. Rough night? His voice was calm, almost indifferent. Sophia flinched slightly, as if even kindness was something foreign to her now. She lifted her head, her tired eyes meeting his. And then, recognition. A flash of shock. Her lips parted, but no words came. Nathan saw it all in an instant. She remembered him. Her gaze dropped in shame, but not fast enough to hide the emotion in her eyes. Regret, embarrassment, fear. "You don't remember me, do you?" he asked, though he already knew the answer. She swallowed hard. "Nathan," she whispered. The name tasted different now, didn't it? No longer the quiet, timid boy she once tormented. Now, he was standing above her, dressed in wealth, success radiating from every inch of him. He waited for her to speak, maybe an apology, maybe an excuse. But all she did was glance at the children, pressing a kiss to the little girl's forehead as if grounding herself. He shouldn't have cared. He should have walked away. Instead, he crouched down, looking at her at eye level. How did this happen? Sophia let out a breath that sounded almost like a laugh, dry, bitter. Life happened. Not an excuse, not self-pity, just the truth. Nathan studied her. This wasn't the girl who had ruled the hallways with cruel confidence, the girl who had laughed when he couldn't afford new shoes. This was someone else entirely. And for the first time he wasn't sure if he wanted revenge, or something else entirely. The wind howled between the buildings, whipping against Sophia's frail frame. She pulled her children closer, shielding them from the cold as best as she could. Nathan watched her carefully, expecting some kind of explanation. But she didn't beg. She didn't ask for help. She just sat there. His chest tightened. "You had everything," he muttered, more to himself than to her. "You were popular, rich, untouchable. What happened?" Sophia let out a slow breath, her fingers absently brushing through her son's tangled hair. "My father's business collapsed when I was 18. Debt collectors took everything. Then my husband." She hesitated, her voice breaking for the first time. "He left when things got bad. Never came back." Nathan's jaw tightened. He had spent years imagining what he would say if he ever saw her again. He thought it would feel satisfying, seeing her struggle after all the pain she had caused him. But it didn't. It just felt heavy. "I used to hate you," he admitted suddenly. The words slipped out before he could stop them. Sophia closed her eyes for a moment, as if bracing for a blow she had been expecting for years. "I know," she whispered, "and I deserve that." The honesty in her voice startled him. He had expected excuses, deflection, maybe even a desperate plea for money. But there was none of that. Just quiet acceptance. A car honked nearby, snapping Nathan back into the moment. He glanced at the two children again, their tiny faces buried against their mother. They weren't responsible for the past. They weren't responsible for what she had done. He reached into his pocket, pulling out a thick wad of cash. He had enough money to change her life in an instant, to wipe away her suffering with a single gesture. But then, he hesitated, because handing her money wouldn't erase what happened between them. And deep down, he knew she needed something else, something that couldn't be bought. So instead of offering the cash, he did something that stunned even himself. He sat down beside her. Sophia stiffened, clearly not expecting that. She stared at him, confusion flickering behind her tired eyes. "What? What are you doing?" Nathan exhaled, resting his arms on his knees. "I don't know." And for the first time in years, that was the truth. They sat there in silence, side by side on the freezing pavement, surrounded by a city that didn't care who they were or what they had been. He had spent so long resenting her, holding on to the past like a wound that refused to close. But now, looking at her, broken, exhausted, but still holding her children like they were the only thing keeping her together, he didn't see his childhood bully. He just saw a mother trying to survive. She let out a shaky breath. "You think I don't remember what I did?" Her voice was barely above a whisper. "The things I said to you? I remember everything, Nathan." She swallowed hard, her fingers gripping the fabric of her worn-out coat. "I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't deserve it." Nathan studied her, the girl who had once been untouchable now barely holding on. He could have humiliated her, could have walked away, could have used this moment to remind her of everything she had done to him. But none of that would change what was in front of him now. "Maybe you don't deserve it," he admitted, "but your kids do." Sophia's breath hitched. She blinked rapidly, as if trying to keep herself from falling apart. Nathan finally pulled out his wallet, but instead of just handing her cash, he pulled out a business card and placed it in her hand. "That's the number for my assistant. She'll set up a place for you to stay, food, whatever you need." He met her gaze. "But I'm not just throwing money at this. You want a job? I'll give you one, a real one, something that gets you back on your feet." Sophia stared at the card like it was something fragile, something she wasn't sure she had the right to touch. "Why? Why would you do this for me?" Nathan stood, dusting off his coat. "Because I know what it feels like to be nothing." He looked down at her, his expression unreadable. "And I also know what it feels like to be given a second chance." Sophia clutched the card to her chest, her lip trembling. The weight of her past, her mistakes, her regrets, it was all there in her eyes. But for the first time in a long time, there was something else too. Hope. Nathan turned to leave, but before he stepped away, he said one last thing. "I don't need an apology, Sophia." He glanced at the two sleeping children. "Just don't let them grow up to be like you used to be." And with that, he walked back to his car, leaving behind the past and giving her a future. Sometimes, the people who hurt us the most are the ones who need saving the most. The question is, are we strong enough to be the ones to save them?